Let's go down to the SEC. Trey, you've been president of the Derail the Lane Train fan account. And you get another moment in the sun here. Because Lane Kiffin once again proves he cannot compete in the biggest games. Georgia absolutely throttles allegedly a top 10 Ole Miss team tonight, 52-17. The game was out of hand before half. They were talking early in the third quarter as Georgia once again drove into the red zone. Yeah, this is probably going to break Ole Miss's will, and we've still got almost half the football game left to play. It was bleak for the Rebs between the hedges. Trey, I'm going to read a stat to you that I think anyone who is a Lane Kiffin supporter is just going to have to go agnostic towards in order to continue to support him. Lane Kiffin is now 4-24 against ranked opponents in his head coaching career. Um, that's not good.
Not great. Not great. And again, it's another coach who we know what we're going to get, right? Like, I don't think I don't know exactly off the top of my head how many years Lane Kiffin has been a head coach when you think about Tennessee, USC, FAU, and now Ole Miss. But in all those years, he's shown us who he is, right? He can win. He can run a solid offense. He cannot run a complete team. And his teams fold when they face a lot of adversity like they did tonight. And obviously, Georgia is just on a completely different talent level than Ole Miss. But Lane Kiffin has a clear ceiling to me. And it goes back to, I know he was a young coach, but I'm old enough to remember when he had a preseason number 1 ranked USC team with a NFL caliber quarterback, and he goes 7-6 as a head coach, right? So he is who he is. He can't win the big games, and Ole Miss is obviously handicapped. We talk about a tough schedule in the SEC West compared to if Lane Kiffin has Penn State's schedule, then maybe he's winning 10, 11 games a year. Maybe he sneaks up and gets Ohio State or Michigan, but I have my doubts because he just coaches completely differently in these big games. It's like he's coaching with one hand tied behind his back.
Yeah. It really is bizarre how Ole Miss, they can frankly bludgeon lesser opponents, even against teams that are on their level. They can look like Lane Kiffin has all the aces up his sleeve. Like he's the boy wonder, he's the genius. No one's going to outcoach him. And then as soon as they go and play a ranked opponent, and a highly ranked opponent in a lot of cases in the SEC, we are universes apart from Ole Miss really being able to compete. Now, I hear you. Ole Miss obviously has a great tradition of upsetting the Alabamas of the world, getting LSU from time to time, beating a team from the East. I get all of that. But the point is, under Lane Kiffin, it's clear. Like we're past the wait and see mark on Lane Kiffin's head coaching career. The fact of the matter is, he's really good at talking a big game on Twitter. He's really good at talking a big game from the press box.
Really good at talking a big game to a kid who's extremely vulnerable in his office too.
Yeah, that was a tough clip. I think just not to pile on him, I think he was right. Like
100%, he was right to kick him off the team, but
yeah, the language that got used was.
I'm gonna lean in on this for a second. I know I'm the resident Lane Kiffin hater on this show, but man, how little of a man do you have to be to use that kind of language on a player when you obviously know you're right? Like, take the high road as North Carolina just sealed a rivalry victory over Duke. Awesome scene there in Chapel Hill. But how little of a man do you have to be? Like that just tells me everything I need to know about that guy's character, right? To use that kind of language, and then the voice crack just added to it, like, but you're done, you're out. Like, he sounds like a depressed middle school teacher, to be honest, that can't handle a classroom.
Yeah, not the greatest look for Lane this week. Georgia, talking about the winners, Georgia racked up over 600 yards of offense in this game. They did that for the second time this season. The last time they did this, they also put up 50-plus points against Kentucky. And as we mentioned, Lane Kiffin's record less than Sterling against ranked opponents. So, Trey, really the question for me now becomes projecting forward. Georgia's got 2 games left They're going to cakewalk more than likely through the rest of this regular season, unless Georgia Tech can kind of reverse course and get something done in the last week of the season. 12-0 Georgia. We know the SEC championship game. They're going to be taking on Alabama. We'll talk about them in just a minute. If Georgia goes 12-0, but then loses to a much improved Alabama team, in your mind, does Georgia make the college football playoff?
So much depends on, elsewhere in the college football space. But, if we have three undefeated teams remaining and we have an SEC champion Alabama, I think they get left out, right? Like if Florida State is still undefeated, if Washington's still undefeated, if Michigan or Ohio State remains undefeated, and then you got a 12-1 Alabama and a 12-1 Georgia, I feel like you got to take Alabama at that point. And Georgia's the fifth team out. And that's a clear case for why we're expanding the college football playoff, because Georgia should deserve to be in. But, in a world where Oregon wins the Pac-12 with one loss, or a world where Florida State stubs their toe against Florida, or in the ACC championship game against Louisville, I think they probably still have a shot.
I agree. I think, I certainly agree. I think when it comes to the expansion case, the thought of leaving a Georgia Bulldog team out that to me has been the number one team for much of the season. They're right there with Michigan, 1 and 2. Take your pick. It doesn't really matter to me. They've both been impressive. But the thought of them losing to a much improved Alabama team, yes, a tied team that looked bad early on in the season, a tied team that barely beat South Florida, that lost to Texas, but it is clearly a different football team. And Jalen Milroe has gone from being benched to someone that guys are talking about being the front runner for the 2024 Heisman Trophy.
He might get a shot at 2023 the way
And
that he's been playing. Like
yeah,
I would not be shocked if he has a couple big games. Like if he has a big game against Auburn, leads him to an upset win over Georgia, he might find his way to New York this year. Like I don't think that's completely out of the question.
so yeah, I agree. I think Georgia has to be in the playoff in an, if we're putting the top 4 teams in the country in, Georgia would need to be in. Whether or not that happens with an SEC championship loss, I guess we'll see. I think you're right. It all depends on what happens in front of them or behind them as it currently stands. But yeah, you can't leave an undefeated Washington and Florida State out, but also you probably have to reward Alabama. What do you do with Texas if they run the table and win the Big 12 championship game? Like it just gets so sticky at that point, without a doubt, in my mind. All of those teams deserve chances to play for a national title.
Gracious, how about